No, I mean, architecture is political. We gotta have that stuff.
Indeed.
We're tearing down communities to build multifamily, and you have to understand we are creating displacement. You're displacing Black and brown folks, and they don't come back.
Half of this podcast would be dedicated to the history of Powerhouse, my journey and my discoveries, and hey, I'm going to solve this housing problem.
Hey guys, what's up? My name is Melissa Daniels. This is the Architecture is Political podcast where Black and brown folks talk about architecture. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and be part of my storytelling. This is a soft tone episode. I'm talking in my deep voice or my subtle voice. The conversation with Dr. Hazel Edwards is very low and mellow. Like, it's something that you would have wine in your hand and you're drinking. It's two people just chatting it up. It's a different vibe. Some guests super hyped. Some guests I'm like loud and my enthusiasm, my excitement. But it was just hey, how you doing? Like it was just that type of conversation, you know? Like, yeah. I don't know how else to describe it. And I'm going over my notes now just to tell you about it. I think the overarching question in the entire conversation is, what do you want to be when you grow up? I met her at the Intersections series over at the National Building Museum. She was there to meet Maple Wilson. Both of them are educators in the academic fields, research, all that good stuff. They both received a Women's Leadership Award given by Architectural Record. So that was amazing. When you think about it, you have these two phenomenal women in the room. And I didn't even think about, let's take a selfie together. And I didn't do that. The amount of selfies that I should have taken with people, and I don't, because I don't think about it, because I always, in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, I'll see you later. There'll be another event. And sometimes that later doesn't happen. And sometimes you need to record those moments. And damn it, I did not record that moment. Going back to that question, what do I want to be when I grow up? No matter what age you are in life, you will constantly be asking yourself that question. You go to architecture school and then you do this row. You graduate, you get a job at a firm, and then you accumulate your AXP, and then you accumulate enough, and then you deal with NCARB, and you take your exams, you get licensed, and then in your job, you go from intern to staff to project manager to project architect to associate, senior associate, and then boom, you're a principal. And then you're like, okay, what's next? In the meantime, hopefully you have a life. Hopefully you're doing things besides architecture, your firm and firm life and building buildings or what have you. But you always go back and ask yourself, is this it? Is this what I want to do? I feel like I checked the box. Now what? And we also talked about, I don't know, like throughout this episode, I'm just in awe of her because I've known her for a while. To be able to be in a position to ask yourself this question, what do I want to be when I grow up? And not be stressed about it. That's another key. You're cool, you're chilling, you're good. And then you're like, it's quiet. Now what? And it just keeps going. Besides receiving the Women's Leadership Award from Architectural Record, she also did a TEDx. We talked about her educational career, why she loves being a professor. And the thing about HBCU schools, let me tell y'all something. The thing about HBCU, and I've done my rant about HBCUs, like why I didn't want to go but I ended up graduating. All that stuff, I've talked about that. But the one thing about Howard and the other 7 is that they do some amazing projects. Like she was talking about her students are working with NASA on like some type of station or something. She gets into it, but I'm just like, Howard students is working with NASA to design something in outer space. And you don't hear about this stuff. Like, I think that's amazing. That's just, and the designs and stuff. And why isn't this public? This is an example of the amazing things that HBCUs do that no one talks about, no one brags about, or even if they do brag, you don't even pay attention to it. Like, I think that's amazing. I didn't do that in my PWIs. You know, like, ugh. Anyways, another thing that we talked about was design intelligence school ranking. So we talked a couple of months back. So this is kind of dated and they are no longer talking about it, but here I am bringing it back up. Why aren't HBCUs ranked? How is this ranked? I've asked and we discussed. So that's the gist of it. I hope you enjoy it. Here you go. Hi, Hazel.
Hi, Melissa.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I was just thinking, and me writing my notes, when I first met you. Do you remember that?
When I think we met was at was in preparation for the Women's Leadership Summit. Okay.
Catholic. I met you at Catholic.
Really?
Yep. Yes. I went to Catholic for 1 year in the late 90s. And I came back and I think you just started a position.
Mm-hmm.
Like I came back maybe early 2000s just to say hi to some folks. And I was like, oh, Black woman. It was just like in this institution. Right. Wow. I came back to see Yates, Professor Yates. I think that's his name.
Yannick,
yeah.
And John Yannick. Uh-huh.
Yes. And because he was the only nice person there that was nice to me. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a NOMA event too, or something like that. Anyway, that's when I remember you. You know, I wasn't memorable.
No. I was, so much was going on back then. And I started teaching at Catholic in 2007. And, it's funny that you mentioned John Yannick because from my interview, from my job talk, he was just so supportive of me and, just making sure that I settled in, once I got the position. He, really, really looked after me until he retired, even after, I don't know, I hope he's doing well now. We were great friends for the longest time after he retired and after I moved on to other things.
What made you go into academics?
That's such a funny story because I always say that I never wanted to go into the family business because both my parents were professors. Both my paternal grandparents were professors. So my mom and my dad they both had PhDs. They both taught at Tuskegee and then at North Carolina A&T State University. And then we moved to Washington. And my mother started teaching at Howard University, and over almost 30 years, she was the founding dean of 3 different schools, either outright founding dean or an interim dean of a new configuration. And my grandfather had taught at Shaw University and later became the president of Kittrell College, both in North Carolina. And my grandfather was the first Negro architect licensed to practice architecture in the state of North Carolina. And my grandmother, when he left Kittrell, they moved to Durham, North Carolina, where my dad essentially grew up. And my grandmother started teaching at North Carolina College for Negroes is what it was called then, but now it's North Carolina Central University. And so I didn't want to do this. And then one day, I was working at Howard. I'd come back to research the history of the development of the campus, the central campus, as a framework for the campus plan. And then that turned into I was a special assistant for campus planning and development. And then one day it was time to change. And so Mel Mitchell was the director of the Institute of Architecture and Planning at Morgan State University. And said, I think you should apply. And so I applied, but I had been consulting and I was interested in continuing that, but wanted a base, the things that I guess consulting doesn't always bring you. But then when I got into it, I remembered My professors, when I was in grad school, was talking about, one professor in particular, talking about how Black people didn't do anything positive in terms of building our communities, and not having more than one professor or three professors, three women professors across 3 degrees, 3 different degree programs, 3 different universities, only 3 women who were my instructors. And so that became my charge, to teach the students something I had not learned in the classroom, but then also encourage them and be a role model for their careers.
What were you consulting?
So I was doing things that were kind of similar to my dissertation. One was working with a professor on a large research project that we were looking at 25 urban areas in Indiana, in the state of Indiana, and kind of employing some of the techniques that I had used in my dissertation to evaluate quality of life. We were looking at a cross section of the community, from people who had homes, telephones. Of course, this was back in the 90s, so 1994, I think, to be exact. We would go to the high schools and get the young people's perspectives. We would go to assisted living units to get the seniors' perspective. We would work with the kids in the juvenile justice program to try to get a broad cross section of the community. But I was also doing work environment surveying and satisfaction work. My dissertation had dealt with resident satisfaction and quality of life. I was also writing proposals for economic development opportunities for electric co-ops in North Carolina. So it was kind of all over the place, but doing kind of something that was very enjoyable to me in terms of research and trying to use my writing skills and my analytical skills to develop proposals so others could get money to support economic development.
From the start of your consulting to like even now with education and even research, is history repeating itself?
Some days I think that it is. I'd like to believe it isn't. My parents were born in the 20s, and so I was talking to one of my cousins recently about how would our parents feel about what's going on today. How many times have they perhaps experienced what we're experiencing today? It's a different version, but I think in some ways it is repeating itself in terms of, looking at how our communities are faring.
Do you think the solutions back then, are we coming up with the same solutions, or are we being more inventive?
That's a tough question, because I think there are some things that are very innovative, but then I think there are also things that are, what's the saying about dressing a pig? Something like that. We're still following the same. Well, some members of our society don't acknowledge the past. And I think we really have to understand what happened, in this country to be able to move forward and come up with really responsive approaches to how we live.
What's the most memorable out of all of your educational careers? What was I don't know, that just fills your soul every time you think about it?
You mean in terms of my own education, or
in terms of because you started your educational career started at Morgan?
Yes, my teaching career.
Your teaching career, yeah. I'm sorry, yeah, teaching.
That's a good question. I think what at different moments, I remember at Morgan State, which was an evening program, Master of City and Regional Planning program. I remember there was one time when I was surrounded by my students, and just seeing and mainly African American women, and just realizing that I was contributing to the future that they would have and the impact that they would have on our communities. I was on the track to follow my grandfather's footsteps and become a licensed architect. But my work now is my students, and helping them to see the broad impact that they can have on our world. I think those moments when they're succeeding, often they'll reach back to me and say, thank you, because you helped me get where I am today. And that's a very proud moment. in an educator's career, at least in my career.
What happened after Morgan?
I was at Morgan State for 8 years, and then I went to Catholic University, and I was at Catholic University for 9 years, was the director of the Master of City and Regional Planning program. All of the universities or several of the universities in DC had planning programs in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, and then they closed in the 90s. 92, it seemed like Catholic, Howard, and George Washington University, each of their programs had closed. So this was an opportunity to bring planning back to Catholic. At the same time, there were other new programs, the Master of Science and Sustainable Design program, and then the Master of Science and Facilities Management program were started. The Sustainable Design program, planning program started at the same time, and then I think Facilities Management was added a year or two later. I was involved with building that program and then also looking at ways to have more efficiency in terms of you could get a planning degree and an MArch degree, a joint degree in, I think, instead of 4 years, you could get it in, we reduced I don't remember exactly, we reduced the amount of time that you could actually get 2 degrees, either a joint degree with planning and sustainable design, planning and architecture, and the architecture and facilities management. I don't think we did a combination. And so I was there for 9 years and then left to go back to my alma mater, Howard University, and served as chair of the Department of Architecture for 6 years.
3 schools, 2 HBCUs, and a PWI.
Mm-hmm.
What are the differences that you've noticed?
I think it comes down to resources, what's available to run the programs. When I was, now Morgan State was very different then in terms of the Institute of Architecture and Planning. And so we were first in Jenkins Hall, and then we moved to Montebello building, which was an old teaching hospital, that the state teaching hospital that the university had acquired. And we were basically working out of what looked like a wing of a hospital. But we built Mal Mitchell, who was the director of the Institute, built a physical place for this school. We had outgrown I'm assuming they had outgrown where they had previously been. This was second floor of the Montebello C Wing, I think it was the architecture and planning studios. Faculty offices were on the floor below. Back then, I think that there were just resources not enough to support the undertaking of the institute, but then also the faculty and the students. But yet today it's, they're a full-blown school of architecture and planning. They have a new building and a lot of opportunities that created a lot of new programs. And so when I joined Catholic University's Architecture and Planning School, we had maybe 525 students, and they had a program in Rome, they had a program in Paris, and I believe maybe Barcelona. And they were in an old building, a building that had been renovated for the school, which to this day, every time I walk into it, I love it. I spent so much time there. But I think there were a lot of resources initially, but of course, 2008 kind of changed a lot of things in terms of the recession, and I believe that they may have closed all of the programs abroad in a way to not challenge the resources for the DC-based program. And Howard, we've been the same kind of thing with resources, just need more resources to support the undertaking. I think all universities generally are the same. They all have their issues I don't think that the HBCUs have more problems. They're just more vocal. I mean, they're certainly here in Washington, it seems like things are publicized more about what happens at Howard than the other schools.
There was an open letter about the design intelligence school ranking. In this open letter, a bunch of schools got together and was like, we'll no longer submit to these rankings.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard about this?
Yes.
What are your thoughts about it? I can share mine briefly. I never supported ranking of architecture schools because it's always the same. You will always get Cornell, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, maybe a school out somewhere in California, and Rice will throw in there a couple of times, but it's always the same schools.
Mm-hmm.
And so I start questioning the validity of it. Like, is it paid? Like, is this real? Like, and that's my opinion.
I think that architecture as a field is so subjective, and it seemed that the way that the design intelligence was structured, it was a popularity contest. There are 7 HBCUs that have architecture programs, and we work together, the 7 schools, but more recently we've had a lot of support from the AIA Large Firm Roundtable group. Many of our students, including myself, have gone to the Ivy Leagues or to those top ranked design intelligence schools. But there's a different type of engagement, I think, that the HBCUs have than the Ivies or the schools that were consistently being ranked. So I think it's a good thing. I was at Harvard recently for an alumni weekend, and Dean Whiting was talking about the letter that I guess the deans of those top ranked schools were submitting this letter. And it's a conversation that had been circulating through other forms, but my understanding is that design intelligence has pulled it. But I don't think there's any place we're not ranked on the U.S. World News Report. We're not ranked. We, being architecture schools, are not ranked. And in some cases, we're in a college of engineering and architecture, and so we're always being asked by the deans, where's the ranking for architecture? So they don't rank us. I think there's a false value that's placed on those schools. Some people are looking at the outcomes of those rankings to make decisions to attend or what have you. But I think it was a good, we'll see what happens. Will there be a newer version, another iteration of the rating system?
What do you think the problem was? I don't want to put words, but why aren't HBCUs ranked in these things? Is it the questionnaire that they ask? Is it the try to get the contacts to the alumni? Like, is it resources? Like you mentioned earlier? Like, I'm just curious.
I'm not sure exactly. I know that there are different surveys that are sent out or can be sent out to different stakeholder groups, alumni, firms, and so forth. And maybe it is an issue of resources and more human capital and trying to get the word out. But it doesn't mean that we're not doing the 7 HBCU architecture programs are not doing well. We are producing 35% or more of the African Americans who become licensed architects. Howard specifically has, I think, 23 of our graduates have become fellows of the American Institute of Architects and have done amazing things across the globe. And I think perhaps it is, I don't know. Like I said, it doesn't mean that we're not doing good. We're not producing graduates who are making changes, impacting change, being catalysts in their communities.
Alumni for Howard is extremely strong. Even like with Hampton, like every time you get a Hampton and a Howard, you always get that battle of who's the real HU,
Right.
So,
well, we are. We are, because Hampton was established as Hampton Institute. So
there you go, spitting facts and starting stuff. You see, you can't.
That's what happens, like you said.
So you recently stepped down from chair. Why?
Why? That's a loaded answer. And so I was the first woman to become the chair of the Department of Architecture at Howard. Architecture had started or was established by the Board of Trustees at Howard in 1911. And so, I'm a graduated in 1986 from the Bachelor of Architecture program, and was very excited to come back and do for our current students what the school had done for me. And when I graduated from Howard, it was the School of Architecture and Planning. And so now we're a department within the College of Engineering and Architecture. When I came in, we had 6 freshmen. We had 67 students across 5 years. And that was not going to be sustainable. You don't, for a 5-year program in particular. And last year we brought in 57 freshmen, and we're over 150. And this year, I understand we have 60 freshmen. And so when I made the decision, first of all, it was partially because of the pandemic. And just, I think we all were impacted by the pandemic and the quarantine. And, I was being very introspective and just realized, we're stable now. And so after 6 years, perhaps it was okay to pass the baton to someone else to take us to the next level. There were a lot of things that happened while I was the chair. We got a fabrication lab. We have new faculty, 2 women on the tenure track, who hopefully will be tenured in the next couple of years. So I felt that it was a point where it was time for me to pass it on and to focus on my own research that I put on hold when I first started with academic administration.
You're still teaching there,
yes.
Correct? Yeah. What's your class? What do you like to teach?
Well, this semester I'm teaching the Urban Design Studio. I've always taught it programs, even though I've been in the city planning teaching or assigned to city planning programs, I was always in a school that had architecture. And so I guess Morgan State, when they started their undergraduate program, that was maybe a year or 2 before I left. And I was teaching urban design then for the undergraduates. And so, it's nice to be able to return to the studio, and try to expose our students to kind of broader issues. And then I'm also teaching, we have a NASA grant. So Howard Architecture is a part of a 7-institution team funded by NASA to develop a space habitat or design space habitat.
Wow.
So we're in year 4. We just started year 4 of that grant. So I'm co-teaching with the co-PI, a class that just helps us move our project forward.
Oh my goodness, that's exciting.
Yeah, it has been very exciting, to apply what we've traditionally used towards earthbound settings for a 0 gravity, partial gravity, not landed space habitat. From the beginning, it's been an amazing experience to watch the students kind of grasp what this is and what they're learning. Okay, it's just a different place. Okay, different conditions. Zero gravity is a little bit out of our norm, but they've come up with amazing ideas.
No site visits.
No.
What's amazed me about Howard and any other HBCU, I can only speak to like Howard, UDC, and I traveled to Hampton like one time in my life. The projects that the students are doing is phenomenal. The topics alone, like I went to besides my 1 year at Catholic, I went to another PWI out in Boston, and the projects just can't be touched. And it's just the quality that comes out of these universities it's amazing. Mm-hmm. So you have this newfound free time with yourself. I see you did a TEDx. Was that recently? And that was a while ago.
That was this summer.
How was that? How you got an email one day? It was like, hey, you want to do TEDx?
Well, it all goes back to the network that you have. I had befriended a professor in the English department at Howard, and she was friends with a woman who was helping or working with the executive director for the TEDx. And they were looking for people to be a part of this event. And so that was back in almost a year ago. It was just amazing. The theme was solutions for humanity. And so my friend and I, who often talk about place, and she had worked for the National Trust, Historic Trust. And so she really understands what place is about and what place means in people's lives. And so we started talking about architecture and how architecture is a solution for humanity, right? So much of our lived experience is in places that have been designed. It was a hard sell. It's like, I don't get it. What do you mean?
How can you not get this?
And so it really became an opportunity to sell architecture as a way to make a difference in our communities. But then, I wove my story of my family history into my own experiences at Howard and at teaching. But yeah, it's just a friend knew somebody and I got an invitation to be a part of it.
Did they coach you?
Yes, I had a coach, Jan Fox, who was a former anchor for, I think, Channel 9 News here. So when I first met her, Jan, I grew up watching you on television.
Right. Oh, my goodness.
Really exciting to work with her. And so, yeah, she helped me with the script. And then it was a great experience. Absolutely great experience.
Wow. You're also on the Commission of Fine Art.
Yes.
It's a little group that you get together from time to time.
Third Thursday of every month. There's the 7 of us.
How has that experience been? You just do all these like fascinating things. It's like,
thank you.
How is this?
I was floored when I got the call or email first from the White House Office of Personnel. Dr. Edwards, you were being considered for the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts. Are you interested? It's like, yeah. And I remember my cousin Margaret and I are like this. We've been close. We didn't grow up together, but we've been close friends, and for most of our lives. And I remember I texted her. It's like, you'll never imagine who I just got off the phone with. I can't tell you. It's like, and so, because it's a 6-month process, you got to be vetted and go through background check and all that. And so she kept trying to get me to tell her what happened. And so back in May of last year, when you might remember, there was it first on Twitter, the people who were asked to step down had leaked their letter. And so, it's like, okay, now I can tell you. But it's been amazing. It started June 9th. And I was elected as the vice chair. So it's been just an amazing experience because we drive around Washington. And I'm not sure how it is for the 2 or 3 members who don't live here in the city. But Peter Cook and I were talking about how, you drive around the city, and there's a project that had come before the Commission of Fine Arts. And we're looking at things from the scale of the master plan for the National Mall to a commemorative coin. Our first meeting in June 2021 included a coin of the National Baseball League. And just being able to hopefully, make very positive suggestions about what this could be and how it could celebrate the history of the Negro League, Baseball League, was just amazing. And so this year has been just, I look forward to the meetings and what I can learn, what I can bring back to my students, as well as hopefully, make a contribution, to lend my voice and my experiences to the projects that come before us.
On top of all this, you recently, probably when this episode has aired, you've already received your award from Architectural Record.
Mm-hmm.
And we met, actually, me and you met last week at the National Building Museum. And I was so excited for you. Like, oh my goodness. Like, I mean, you're just winning. How did that, you just got a phone call? You got an email?
I got an email from the editor-in-chief. And again, you are the winner of the Architectural Record Women in Architecture Design Leadership Award in the category of education. Do you accept? What? Thank you. I mean, it was just I was just shocked. I mean, because it's an independent jury of architects who review the candidates, and just the things that I won't talk about were the kind of the struggles that I had with being the first woman chair. And so it was just such a wonderful kind of, I don't know, acknowledgement that I had been doing something right. But something that I always say to my students: you don't know who is watching you.
Exactly.
I don't know how I came before the White House, got on the radar to be considered for the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts. I don't know, how my name came up for this award, but it's just such a humbling experience to know that somebody, Architectural Record has been around since 1890, I think, and is the leading source of information on architecture, planning, engineering, and other things that impact our field. And to win this award as an educator it means so much to me. And the other thing that I think is so beautiful is that the ceremony is actually on my mother's birthday. And so a lot of almost everything I know about academic leadership came from her. So it's just a very special moment.
Again, like, I feel like I've known you for a long time, and I know your story, and just I don't know, like, finally there's like sunshine and rainbows behind you. You're the most deserving person that I know, that all the goodness and greatness is happening to you. So what's next?
Well, thank you for your kind words. I don't know. And it's interesting because after my parents died, but they both died in 2005, and I was really struggling. I had to seek a grief counselor, and one day she came to me. I during a session before we left. She said, "Next week, I want you to come back with 5 goals." 5 goals. I mean, like, just drop the goals like that.
I know.
It's like, what are you talking about? I just finished my students, and I just finished a strategic plan for a community. So I developed this strategic planning process, which confirmed that when you plan and you have goals established, that they actually happen, because you have these benchmarks. And I thought it was an amazing process. And so I keep saying, I have a piece of art that I have the document, but then I also have a piece of art that I created as a result of that, to reflect the strategic plan. And I look at it every day. It's in my kitchen. It's like, oh yeah, that ended in 2016. And so now what? I'm not sure. I have a lot of research that I had put on hold while I was at Catholic and at Howard, being the program administrators or department chair. And one of the projects is bringing the Long Walk, the Placemaking Legacy of Howard University, the book that I co-authored, up to date. That was finished in 1996. And a lot has happened since then in terms of the growth of the campus. And so that's one project. But I'm trying to reimagine, trying to figure out, after all these years, who do I want to be when I grow up? And part of it is, when I got my PhD, I wanted to travel around the world and help communities improve their quality of life. And so my shift to making sure that young people had those skills and that training to do that, not saying that that's over, it's just, do I want to revisit that, especially now that the world is opened up? So I'm not sure what next is. I think next is, pulling out that strategic plan, which I call the life montage, and writing it down. And it's really fashioned like a strategic plan with a history part and, what drives me. I think the same things drive me that drove me in 2006, but what does it mean today and for the next chapter of my life?
If you were you, but 20 years ago, 2002, and you're like, what am I supposed to do with the rest of my life? A little bit of panic comes in, right? Like, oh my goodness, what am I supposed to do with my life? But 20 years later, you're like excited about it, like what possibilities are out there for me?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's inspirational and encouraging to anybody who's listening, who's like, what the hell am I supposed to do with my life? Because I think you've accomplished so much already. And to see again where you were to where you are now, it's amazing. Like it's exciting and it's I'm so happy for you.
Well, again, thank you for your kind words. In 2002, if we're going back 20 years, I was in a tenure track position, teaching position, I was assistant professor. And so that was 4 years into my tenure or my time at Morgan State. My playbook at the time was, okay, I'm teaching in a play. Right before I joined the faculty at Morgan, I had passed the American Institute of Certified Planners exam. And so to me, I needed that credential. I mean, I had done much of planning. I had worked on a couple of campus plans for Howard University, been before the Board of Zoning Adjustment, done the things that planners do, but that credential really, to me, gave me the validation, that the credibility rather, that I knew about planning. But then I'd been working in DC, and Maryland, and particularly Baltimore, is very different. Even though they're only 40 miles apart, they are very different. And so I got involved with the Maryland chapter of the American Planning Association, and I started to build a network that ultimately I needed to support my students. So that, because I was assigned to teach planning law or land development law, and I had taken a planning law class when I was at Harvard in my master's program, but, I'm not a zoning attorney. And that argument didn't fly with the program coordinator. But I taught land development law for 6 years. The first year I struggled, but then out of necessity, building that network, I met people who worked at the Department of Natural Resources, who worked on environmental law issues. So I would teach, the first part of the class was about theory and concepts, and then I would bring people in to talk about applications and the real life situations. And so that's been kind of the playbook I've followed ever since. Now I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners, and you couldn't have told me back in 1999 when I passed the AICP exam that I'd be here, that I'd be on the commission, that I'd, be doing the things that I have done in this time. I was hit really hard by the death of my parents because they died 3 months apart. I remember feeling completely lost. I was working on cover letters for applying for positions at other universities. And I remember, sitting at my computer, just breaking down, gut wrenching, sobbing. Why aren't they here? They always help me with this, rah, rah, rah. And then it dried up. It's like, wait a minute, you got this. They prepared you. They prepared you for this day. And you listen to the TEDx video. I talk about my father once, telling me when I graduated from University of Illinois, where I got my PhD, he said, now you're a bear. And, for years he had told me this story about a mother bear, taking her cubs around the forest, teaching them how to basically be self-sufficient. And one day she sends them up a tree, and when they came down, they were bears. She was gone, but they were ready to take care of themselves. that's where you are. You figure out the past 17 years how to make it and hopefully make them proud. I'm sure they had something to do with it, but
For sure.
working the magic up there. I am excited about what the possibility is. Not that this isn't the end of my life, I hope, but it's an opportunity to reimagine what can be. I still have a few years, hopefully, another 10, 20 years left to make a contribution to this world. And I'm excited about what that may be.
I'm excited too. I can't wait to interview you again about your next chapter. Thank you so much, Hazel. I love talking to you. Every time I see you, you bring a smile on my face, whether it's virtual or in real life. I'm like, Hazel.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I just, like I said, I want for my students, I want for our world to have more diverse voices.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully I have played a part in that. And I will continue to do that because I think that, in my TEDx talk, I discussed just how important the HBCU architecture programs have been. I mean, I had a pivotal moment in undergrad when Norma Sklarek was the keynote speaker for a conference that Howard sponsored of minority women in architecture. And just listening to what she went through and how inspiring that was to hear her story. I think that, I don't know how many women you had as professors in your studies, but we need to have more women and listen to women. We don't always listen to women's voices, but we also need to have more Black and brown women who are teaching our students.
I'm trying to think back. I don't think I've ever had a Black female professor in high school, because I went to high school here in DC, so it was Black teachers everywhere. Mm-hmm. And that was okay because I knew a bunch of Black architects who were women. It didn't bother me because I could always tap that resource. Mm-hmm. But it probably did affect me subconsciously that I wasn't reflected of what I was, seeing in the person who was teaching me architecture. Mm-hmm. Or in anything, physics, English. Like it's interesting. Yeah. And how important that is to see a reflection of yourself in learning.
And I'll say that having gone to Howard and, my mother was a dean at Howard, so I was around. We moved to Washington when I was 7. And, we, Renee Kemper-Tan was the only woman I had over the 5 years, only woman who was my professor at Howard. And that conference that I mentioned before, she had organized. And I look at pictures of the conference and, our auditorium, which has a capacity of maybe 200 people. I mean, people lined up on the walls. I mean, it was just an amazing experience. I've had really strong women, certainly my mother and her sisters. My cousin and I are talking about a book to tell their story. 3 women who came out of East St. Louis, Illinois they were all born, I think, in the 20s. I'm not sure about from 1921 to 1930. But we need to know the strength of Black women and tell these stories. At Howard, like I'm sure the other HBCUs, race was not the factor. We have students from all over the world. And I don't remember, feeling like I wasn't chosen for something because I was Black, or I wasn't chosen for something, or I was chosen for a merit. When I went to Harvard, oh my, it was just more so my classmates, it's again, this was 1987 to 1989. My classmates, it's tiring. It seemed like no one knew Black people. Mm-hmm. No one had Black friends.
Yeah.
And, the questions that, or the what we call now microaggressions. I just felt like I was prepared, very well prepared, having come out of Howard, to get through Harvard and get through a doctoral program at Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think going back to what we were saying earlier about just the value of the HBCUs is just broader. We're exposed to people in a way, in an authentic way that I don't think you experience at other universities.
I remember when I was at Catholic for that year, I had a philosophy class, and the professor had a topic about, can't remember the exact wording he used, but the topic was affirmative action in the philosophy class, and all the students, and it was me and this other Black person in class, and everybody was like, yeah, it's not fair. My friend applied to this university and they didn't get in. It's not fair that you let, people in based on their race. And I was looked at to defend it. And I was like, I didn't prep for this. This wasn't in the syllabus, And so it was just, and I went to the teacher. I was like, that's not fair. Like, how could you have a topic? And he was like, well, you should have said something. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you defend yourself? And that's why I left Catholic. Because of that. But yeah, it's sad to say, if you went to a PWI, you've experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to carry yourself higher to higher standard just so you could just finish and get the hell out of there. And I was not that strong. I was not that strong, even though I went to one PWI to go to another PWI, and that the faculty there was phenomenal up until a certain point, and I started dealing with adjuncts. That's a whole different story. But yeah, absolutely, we've all experienced that, and sad to say, and how HBCUs give you reprieval of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think people in our industry understand truly how important those 7 universities are.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that at any architectural firm that has a Black and brown person in it, they came from one of those 7
mm-hmm.
HBCUs. Not to say any PWIs don't graduate, but like you gave the statistics before.
Mm-hmm. So I was on jury duty a couple of weeks, maybe last week. As you're waiting to sign in at the courthouse, they have a video talking about unconscious bias. And I remember being on, while I was chair, being on committees or in forums where people were talking about, we just don't understand these students, the students of color, they don't want to do this, they won't do, just having kind of stereotyping the students and putting them into a box. So everybody who's Black or brown goes into this box. And, I look at the students that we have, now 160 students at Howard. They are so different. They come from, we have students, which was an interesting thing when we first went virtual in fall 2020. We had students from California, from the Caribbean, Jamaica, primarily in Trinidad, and the students in Ethiopia and every place in between. And just the range of backgrounds. I mean, that some of our students, their parents were on the front lines as doctors and nurses, fighting the pandemic. And with students who are, we have I think 45% of our students are Pell Grant eligible. And so there's great need, but our students are not one size fit all. They have such unique backgrounds and characteristics and personalities. And I think it's our job as educators to nurture those, what's inherent to those students, to meet those students where we find them, not to say, oh, well, she's Black, he's Black, therefore, they're not going to amount to anything. And that's what I think happens at other universities. It might happen at Howard too and at the HBCUs, but I think it's so important for us to, meet people where we find them and help to nurture kind of that inner architect or inner planner or thought leader,
Mm-hmm.
something that I continue to say. Yeah, I want our students to become licensed architects and designers, but I want them to be thought leaders. I want them to, we've got a world out here we got to change or impact positively.
Mm-hmm.
And why can't our students be the ones who make that change, bring about that change?
Is there anything else you want to talk about? Or say?
I am so proud of you. And
What?
let me turn it around to you. I was when I saw the Whitney Young Award recipients for this year, I was just so excited that you and Catherine and Kathy and I'm missing somebody.
The other Kathy.
Right, the other Kathy Freeman. I was so excited to see that you all were receiving the honor for your work, which I think has been amazing. And so I just want you to know that I'm very proud. I've you said you've known me for a while, but I remember working with you on that Women's Leadership Conference Summit, the WLS back for 2017, and just how amazing you were. And I'm so proud to know you and to learn about this podcast. And I really appreciate you inviting me to be a part of this. And I look forward to seeing what you're doing next.
I know, me too.
I remember at the conference, you were interviewing Dina Griffin, and I think it's so important that we hear stories of, women of color. I remember some of the things that Dina was talking about, and, with the, being the project architect and people talking to her like she was the secretary or the assistant. You get me coffee kind of thing.
Right.
But the work that she's has done, through her career.
It's amazing. I think I don't want to sound like a hater. You see people out there who get accolades and you're like, and their story and you're like, why are you praising this person when you have this other person right next to them? And they just don't know the stuff that Black women go through, the stories I hear, and yet they persevere. And it shouldn't be a rite of passage either. It shouldn't be you have to go through this to achieve anything. Like it shouldn't be that way. But it's like I always say, like, I don't want to be a superwoman. I've always said that. I don't want a cape. I am not a superwoman. And no Black woman should be a superwoman. We should just be at peace. And I don't know, going back to you, Hazel, is this, you are like, when I saw you, you had a glow. You was just like, life is just like you, even now, there's a little halo around you. Like, he's just so, I was like, yes, like, it's just, you're
bringing tears to my eyes.
I don't mean for you to cry.
But, it's something that, stepping down as chair, it was something I had actually written my resignation letter in June 2021.
Wow.
And I said, well, no, there's just one more thing I want to do. There's just one more thing I want to do. And then it got to the point where it's like, I'm choosing me. I'm choosing Hazel. I'm still there. I'm still going to support my students, but I've got to.
Yeah.
I mean, my first semester, when I became department chair, I found out I had cancer. And so thankfully we caught it early, stage 1A. Always listen to your body. Things aren't supposed to be happening and they happen. Gotta get it checked out. And I mean, that was a story I was on, trying to convince my friends, have you done this? Have you done that? You've got to, this is my experience. This is what you have to do. And so 5 years later, I'm cancer free. Thankfully, thank God for that. And then I 2019, I just had progressively worse mobility. My left hip was bone on bone, and I don't think I saw you, but I was at the point where I could not walk without a cane or a screen. Every time I moved, I screamed because I was in so much pain. And I just keep saying that, okay, so now hip replacement surgery. Okay. And I joke with my friends and my family. It's like, God's telling me you got more to do. We got to get you together. You got more to do. You can't sit down. You got cancer? No. You can't walk? No. You got more to do. And so I think that's the glow, that knowing that now hopefully I have the space, or I intend to have the space, the emotional space, the physical space, what have you, to be able to do more good. Hopefully, I'm glad that you think that I've been doing good. Architectural Record seems to think that I've been doing good. But, just being able to, I'm laughing and smiling more. I'm trying to be more engaged, trying to get back to whoever I was and whoever I'm supposed to be. And so I was so excited to see you that day, last Friday, I guess it was. And I'm always so inspired when I hear Mabel Wilson talk about her.
Yes.
She's amazing.
She is amazing.
And, she, this award, this Architectural Record Award for Women in Architecture Design Leadership this is the 9th year, and Mabel is one of the educator recipients. So I was just really excited to share the award with her. But then, so Mabel at Columbia, the deans of Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Tulane, University of Miami, and a couple of other places, Cornell maybe. And so, just it's wonderful that Mabel and I are a part of that group.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm interviewing Mabel in a couple of weeks. And one of the things that I was talking to somebody about this, and I was like, I don't know what to ask Mabel. She's very well documented and interviewed by hundreds of people. And I'm like, I don't know what to talk to her about that you can't easily look up. So that'll be a challenge for me, but I'm excited to talk to her. And so what, just for the audience know, at the National Building Museum, they're doing a series called Intersections, and which this podcast is partnering with them. So Mabel will be coming up as part of that series. A constant joy with you, Hazel. I'm just exhaling right now. That's all I was doing, just exhaling with you.
Well, I'm trying not to say anything else to keep talking.
Me too, because we could be talking forever.
Like she said, she wanted this to be.
Okay, I'm gonna end it on this note then. And
thank you so much for reaching out and for giving me this opportunity to hopefully say something meaningful that will inspire somebody, one of your listeners.
Me and the other listener is inspired. So me and that one other person. Thank you again, Hazel, for your time.
Can I just say one little thing?
Sure.
So when I taught in planning programs, I remember talking to a planning director in North Carolina that all of the interns for that firm, for that public agency, came from one school, which most of the students were suburban, grew up in the suburbs. They had certain characteristics. And I remember this woman saying, we've got to have a more diverse group of people who understand planning and planning issues so we can do things differently. We can't continue to get the same thing over and over again because we're training people, we're pulling from schools where they have the same perspective.
Yeah.
And so, that's something that I realized teaching the graduate architecture seminar this semester, that I'm using some of the materials that I had used in the past. And we need to update them. We need to update we need the Black voices in these materials that are used in our schools.
One thing I didn't talk about with you is architectural education in general and how it hasn't changed.
Mhm.
Is that accurate? Like it hasn't, is that due to NAB or is it school based? Like whatever architecture school feels like teaching, like how does that work?
So NAB has gotten more, I'll say, flexible. And I think ultimately they leave it up to the schools to, as long as they're meeting certain criteria, that's, I mean, when I first started at Howard, we were actually going up for reaccreditation, and there were 26 student performance criteria that we had to meet. Now there are maybe 6, but other issues are folded in to program criteria that has to be met. And so I think that over the years, and this is from when I first started teaching at Morgan State, that NAB has become less restrictive. It's up to the school's interpretation of how they teach the material. But we still need to teach our students how to make a building stand up. We need to teach about materials. We need to teach about, a host of other things. But I think that more and more we need to be talking about the broader contributions of architects. And so we have, and I'm not sure, I'm not saying that we're unique, Howard is unique in this, but we have a class called Black Architects. And the professor is showing our students stories, unveiling the stories of Black architects historically, I think, but showing how they practiced, what their buildings are, their work is. And that's one of the things that I think is so exciting about studying architecture in Washington, because not only do we have, we're in the nation's capital, but we have, so many periods of architecture represented. So we can go to a building that was built in the 19th century. We can go to very modern buildings. But we have the head of the headquarters of the American Institute of Architects, the headquarters of the National Organization of Minority Architects. We have our graduates and others we have so many architecture firms here so that we can see practicing a work in progress, rather, the work in progress. And so I think it's very exciting that we can, like I was saying before with my playbook that I developed when I was teaching at Morgan State, we can present theories and concepts, but then we could actually go out and touch and experience buildings in Washington or in the region. My studio is working on a project in Frederick, Maryland, which is an exciting opportunity, a very different project for the urban design class, but one that's impacted by all of the key things: transportation, environmental issues, housing availability, and the like. And so I think there are excuse me, there are standards that we have to meet, but then how you present that is very different.
What about planning?
There are only 4 planning programs at historically Black universities.
Oh.
And just 4. And Morgan State, Jackson State University, Alabama A&M, and Texas Southern University. And those are 4 accredited programs. Now they have, and I'm hesitating because I honestly don't remember, but they have certain criteria that the schools have to meet. But again, I think it's all in the flexibility of how you deliver the material. But we also need more teaching materials. When I started teaching at Morgan, June Manning Thomas and Marcia Rizstoff, their book, Urban Planning in African American Communities, had just come out. It was an edited volume that had basically laid out the legislative policy issues that impacted our communities. Federal Highway Administration's policies that dissected Black communities, zoning ordinances and covenants that disallowed Blacks and whites living on the same block and things like that. We need those types of references, those types of materials to help our students understand our present day communities.
I'm always on social media, and when the 2020 hit, besides the pandemic and all the protests that was happening, I saw a rise in, even, I'm trying to think even prior prior to that. I saw a lot of planning activists, and they seem to have their nose to the ground when it came to social justice and community planning than architects do either or. I actually thought about switching careers and go into planning because I felt that they were more equipped with the community in development than architects. Is that accurate? You can see both points of view really quickly. I know. Keep coming up with these things.
I think that planning is much more holistic, that we are planners, scales of engagement from the individual to the region and beyond. Planners are trained to understand systems in a different way, social systems, environmental systems, and so forth, in a way that I don't think architects are trained to do. And so one of the things that, back when I was teaching at Morgan, and my students and I were, this was a time in Baltimore where the drug activity was just overpowering. We worked in a couple of communities where, and I'll preface this by saying that I think it was the 2000 census, there were 54,000 vacant and abandoned properties in Baltimore. We were working in neighborhoods where I don't know what percentage of the houses were boarded up. There were blocks that didn't have occupants. We had to understand transportation systems and the service. I remember when we would go out on our walks with the president of the neighborhood association, we would run into those who would talk about how when she was growing up, the alleys were so clean you could eat off of the pavement. We were just staring at trash and debris riddled across the alleys. And she talked about the services. Trash pickup wasn't what it used to be. I think that the planners understand or trained to understand things, the connections of different systems. So like I said, the transportation, the housing, looking at housing policies, we're looking at social policies. And that's something in this urban design studio that I'm teaching this semester at Howard. We're having the students look at the big view to be able to zoom down to a site. Architects, I think, start with the site and maybe look at the edge conditions, but then not always the larger scope. We're looking at how do people get to this site? What are the implications of an interstate highway being an edge to this property that we're ultimately looking at? And so I think there is a difference in how planners are trained. And so social justice, spatial justice, environmental justice issues, I think have been at the forefront, particularly. I remember when I was at Morgan State, I had just come in, or it was just before I came in as a faculty member. They had a conference on environmental justice and looking at, Robert Bullard's work with environmental justice and landfills, and disproportionate number of minority and low-income neighborhoods are close to landfills and all the bad things, all the things that are impacting our health and well-being, pollution, water quality, and the like. And I'm not sure that architects are broadly looking at those issues.
Hazel, I'm gonna let you go.
Again, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Hey, listeners. I have an exciting announcement. I decided to launch a membership program for the show, where you have a chance to support me and the show directly. I love creating the show, and it means the world to me that you all tune in to keep hearing me week after week. But it takes an immense amount of time and energy to produce. I want to keep the show going, and I want to invest in its growth. And I also want you to become a partner with me in this journey. That's why I'm excited to give you a chance to officially become a supporter of the show at glow.fm/archispolly, ARCHIS POLLY, or by clicking the link in the show notes. It's quick and easy. It takes less than 30 seconds and just takes clicking a link in the show notes and using Apple or Google Pay. You don't have to create any new logins, and you can contribute as much or as little as you like. If this show is part of your day or week and you like what I'm doing, then visit glow.fm/archespoly, all one word, and support me and the show in any way you can today.